In the Battlefield community, there's been a discussion going on about color correction for a very, very long time, and now it's rearing its ugly head again. But I feel like this is a subject I can really weigh in on, because now with the Battlefield 6 open beta, people are seeing, people are believing, and people are having lots of opinions about this once again. So, let's get into it. So why do people care so much about color grading? Color grading has been a part of the Battlefield identity for a very long time. I mean, we can go back to Bad Company 1 with like very overexposed highlights and like a bleach curve and very contrasty type look. We have Battlefield 3 that had the infamous blue tint filter that everybody absolutely hated, and don't worry, we're going to be talking more about that. We had Battlefield 4, which was more of a red type vibe, and then Battlefield 5, which was sort of muddy, gray, blue. And if you noticed a couple of titles missing there, don't worry, we're going to get to that. What is color correction? Well, color correction in video games is almost the same as the color grading process that we have for doing videos and doing TV and things of that nature, right? And that's completely different from calibrating your sensor or calibrating white balance or exposure and stuff like that. It's more of when all that is done, you try to create a look, you try to create a feeling that you get when you look at the video, right? So an example would be The Matrix, for example, with its very green colors to signify that we are in the digital realm, that Neo is in the Matrix kicking ass, you know? That's not something that was done in camera. They didn't color the lights green or anything like that. That was done as a deliberate effect after the fact to create a sort of vibe, to create a sort of feeling, right? And if you take that away from The Matrix, for example, then what do you have? It's just an action movie that's sort of gray. And then when people walk away from that movie, they're gonna remember, oh, The Matrix, that's that green movie. That's that green, bro. That becomes a very important part to create an identity for the movie itself, right? Or for the TV show, or for the game, for that matter, that you're working on. So why are people upset? Why is this a small deal? Why is this a big deal? Who cares, right? If color grading has been part of the Battlefield timeline for so long, why do people give a shit now? Like, why is this a big deal? The expectations have changed, I think. So if we look at like Battlefield 3, it's very blue, it's very contrasty, it has this bleach filter to the midtones. And you know, it gives it a very, very serious feel. There's sharp contrast, there's very heavy color correction, and it's not subtle, it's very evident. Like, you can look at the image and see that these are not the original colors, right? The problem was a lot of people felt like they were being robbed of the colors in that game. Like, I distinctly remember people uploading like an image from Operation Metro where it was one copy with color grading and one without, and people were like, damn, that's what the game could have looked like? Are you serious? That looks so much better. For Battlefield 4, as a response to that criticism, the colors were dialed back up. Some kid just dropped a balloon out the window, and that sucks. The bleach filter was toned down quite a lot, and the blues were shifted towards red instead. Even the lens flare wasn't safe, so they like removed that grimy, dirty rainbow type effect when you looked up at the sun. They replaced that with like an anamorphic lens flare, like those horizontal streaks instead, which I thought looked pretty freaking cool. And people seemed happy about Battlefield 4. I don't think that received as much criticism as Battlefield 3. In 2016 though, everything changed. Like, the graphical identity changed completely. The old consoles were finally able to be thrown aside, and with it, you know, the old techniques that they used to model and make assets and stuff like that. So suddenly the graphical fidelity got this massive boost, and most of that is thanks to using photogrammetry, which is a process where you take hundreds of images of an object, round and round, different angles, up, down, you name it. And then you put that into a computer and you can mathematically calculate what that object looks like in 3 dimensions, right? You can get a 3D model, but you also get the textures, and especially like natural assets. The way gravel has like fallen down a hill or something, that's very hard to model because you're gonna have to model all those small bits and pieces yourself. But now we can just take a bunch of pictures, slap it into the game, and it looks absolutely phenomenal. But I would like to add that I don't think photogrammetry is the only cause for Battlefield 1 looking so good. I think it also has to do with the color and the color grading and the very natural sort of look that the game had. Because there was this renewed focus on exterior environments that looked very natural, very, very plain. It was almost like you were stepping into the scene yourself. So the color grading was very minimal. There was barely any tints that I can remember. I mean, some maps still had it for sure, 100%, but it did not take center stage, and a lot more emphasis was put on these natural looking vistas. I mean, I still remember like booting up Monte Grappa for the first time and being like, how is this running on my 1070 with good frames? How did they do this? And a lot of the colors looked good. Like there was a good toe into the shadows, and the highlight roll off and the highlight clipping looked absolutely stellar. It looks like you're looking at film video, like film photography. That's exactly what it looks like. It doesn't look like a video game anymore. That's not to say that Battlefield 1 didn't have color correction, because I'm sure there's a whole lot of stuff that's happening behind the scenes, but they were engineered in such a way that they don't take center stage, and they're more so trying to complement the realistic look that they were going for. They were going for a no filter look, and to be able to attain that goal, there has to be some filters along the way. That sounds counterintuitive, but I'm 100% sure there's plenty of color correction on all of the maps in that game. But I also feel like some of that was lost with Battlefield 5. Here, those like harsh and more aggressive color corrections came back once again. So standout maps here were Panzerstorm and Devastation, which had very pretty blue tints to them. And so 2042 is 2042, so I'm not going to talk about that. I'm still sad and mad about the $120 I blew on that pre-order. But I do remember like some maps had color corrections towards blue, but also not a whole lot. I remember plotting it in DaVinci Resolve. The colors in that game basically covered the entire gamut, much like Battlefield 1, so they were a lot more restrictive, I should say, with the color corrections in that game. So now we've had one title that was very highly regarded and had very light color correction, and now we've had 2042, which also had very light color correction. So one of the greatest and the latest were very light. And here we come to Battlefield 6, and they have dialed that stuff right up. I mean, they have done their utmost to create these filters. They look good. They're good filters, but they're very harsh. They're very much up in your face, up front and center. As I said, all games have had these color corrections in some form, shape, or another, but this form of correction is very much engineered to be felt. Like, it's not made to be in the back as salt and pepper, but rather up front. Like, this is the main part of your dish, dude. This is the main part of the presentation. They want you to see that. And some people, because of that, are a little bit less than impressed. So why have they done this? Why have they put these very heavy filters on the new game? Well, part of me thinks that they're trying to harken back to the old days, right? They're trying to invoke the sense of Battlefield 3 because people have very fond memories of that. It's sort of nostalgia baiting, but also adding a new twist to the game while separating it from the rest of the franchise, basically. Most maps in the beta, from what I can see, are using some sort of two-part toning with some lift color and complementing highlight shift. So basically what that means is we color the shadows one color and we color the highlights another color, all this done using lift, gamma, and gain. So this is very much filmic. It looks like a professional color grade. There's like nothing wrong with that at all. The colorists have done a great job, and that's not the problem that I'm talking about here. I don't think people are upset about that, but it would seem that people are sort of thinking it's been hammered home a little bit too hard, much like in the Battlefield 3 days. So my thought is, I think play expectations have changed a lot since like Battlefield 1, and that expectation has been that the hard color grading that people were upset about in the past would not return, but it would seem that it has made a return. So as someone with a passing interest in editing, videography, and video games, I found this very interesting, so I've tried my best to degrade the footage so we can compare before and after and see what people think. You know, do you prefer a more natural or do you prefer a more cinematic type of vibe for the Battlefield franchise? So Siege of Cairo has very aggressive purple tint in the shadows, while the highlights are shifted towards warm tones. So purple and yellow are more towards the warm side of the color spectrum, and that makes sense. We're in the middle of Cairo, it's pretty sunny, you know, we have the palm trees and everything going on. It makes sense, but it is teetering a little bit on that edge for like a Mexico filter, I feel like. But if we remove it, we start to see a whole lot more color in the sky and the palm trees and all the soldiers on the ground. And personally, I think the game's quality starts to match that of Battlefield 1's closer, which is what I prefer. But then again, it's just a question about taste here. Liberation Peak has a very, very, very cold tint to it. And also a lot of contrast is applied, so the blacks are completely crushed. Like we have some lows clipping which I'm not the biggest fan of. I really like when there's a nice toe in to the lowlights, and right now what that means is there's almost always going to be at least one pixel in the image that is completely black. And then of course with a very harsh highlight contrast as well. So like you have very, very bright portions on the screen and very, very dark portions of the screen. I'm not really a big fan of that, and I feel like a lot of people that are talking about the tint problem are talking about this map specifically. It's very, very hard to remove that hard contrast, but I have done my best in order to make it look more natural. But then again, we are in the middle of the mountains, like under a harsh sun without much bounce lighting, so I suppose it makes sense that there are very, very dark areas even on your player character and arms, but I would prefer a little bit more ambient light from the surface, like bouncing up. So yeah, if you're watching this, increase those light probes just a little bit. I think that would make a bit of a difference. Then we have the Iberian Offensive, which is very green and yellow. Like, it's nice, but I also here prefer it without the grading. It's a common theme. Yeah, you're starting to notice a pattern, yeah? But I think removing the color filter really brings out the fires in the background and make them stand out a whole lot more, as well as like the other pretty colors in the map. If you really look at it without the color correction, it is quite a pretty colorful map at places. But then again, it is war-torn, it is very much gray, there's a lot of concrete dust all over the place. So maybe it is nice with filters, but I prefer them off. Empire State is also like a very Battlefield 3 type filter where everything is just blue. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of processing. Very, again, heavy contrast curves. I think that's just part of the visual identity for this game. But the interiors and exteriors seems graded on their own, so it changes depending on where you are on the map, if it's a blue filter, if it's a gray filter, or whatever it is. I do see that it's very reminiscent of the maps from like the DLC pack Close Quarters from Battlefield 3, which I really like. But then again, map sizes are for another video. Let's focus on the color grading. When the cars are on fire, you have the early morning or late afternoon. I don't know which one it is. It probably says somewhere. The light coming from the sun, where it's like sort of orange, I think is very pretty, and we can really draw some more attention to that if we reduce the color grading, which is quite heavy. So what I'm very interested in is what other people think about this. You know, if you haven't thought about it at all, if you've thought about it a lot, you know, do you guys prefer the more filmic quality of the color correction that we've seen in Battlefield 6 so far, or do you prefer the versions without the color grading? Do you like the sort of Battlefield 1 more naturalistic vibe? Which one feels more Battlefield to you? Let me know in the comments below, because I find this very interesting. Anyway, I'm gonna keep on playing with my ungraded versions of these maps, and if EA suddenly shifts their artistic direction for the game this late into the production cycle, you guys will know exactly where they got it from. All that being said, please like if you liked the video, dislike if you didn't, subscribe for more. I want to create more content just like this, very much related to FPS games and Battlefield. So if you're into that sort of stuff, click the subscribe button, click the bell, and stick around, and I'll see you on the battlefield.